All right, everyone, how are you? Welcome to this week's episode of our podcast. It's called Is Breakfast Included? Thanks for stopping by. On the show this week, I sit down and have a conversation with the CEO and founder of Falbo Guitars, Frank Falbo. Frank, a self-proclaimed disruptor, is also an innovator in the guitar industry, as well as Steve Stevens Guitar Tech, which is where I met him. I had a lot of fun catching up with Frank and finding out about everything he does, everything he has coming up, as well as what he likes for breakfast. It was a lot of fun. Let's check it out. Tell everyone who you are.
Well, I am Frank Falbo, and guitar maker, guitar nerd, and that spans a whole lot of different areas of our industry.
Yeah. And you were upon I've known you as a tech, but upon doing some research, you really are a guitar nerd.
Yeah, in the greatest sense of the word. I mean, it's a term we use affectionately nowadays, right? It's not the same as giving somebody a wedgie.
Yeah.
In high school or anything. It's a term of endearment. And yes, I've nerded out on guitars and guitar stuff since I'm, a kid. I started playing when I was 8, and so I was already like taking apart my guitars and stuff at 10 or 11 years old, just tinkering and stuff like that. So I'm it goes all the way back, for me. And I was just as much interested in the techie side of guitars as I was in, playing, right? So it's like everyone kind of has their Eddie Van Halen. And then I also had like guitar makers were my Eddie Van Halen too. The local guy was Rick Kremer in Aurora, Illinois, and you got like a Roger Sadowski, you got a Rich Lasner, all these people who were involved in the companies doing the R&D and building guitars and designing cool new guitars. That was kind of I was just as excited about that, and pickups and Seymour Duncan. Replaced my first pickups when I was, I think, 13 years old, 12 or 13. I put in the Duncan JB,
the standard.
It really was. And I thought long and hard about it. Like I read that catalog, like top to bottom, inside out, and then still ended up on the JB, based on the descriptions and everything I could get my hands on at the time. There's no internet. And so, it was kind of funny that, my first pickup change, I ended up right back at the main one that everyone kind of ended up at,
Yeah.
But it was great. It did the job. It was in the BC Rich Morlock for a while.
Where did you grow up again?
I'm in the Chicagoland area, so like west suburbs, west of the city. On a clear day, you could see the Sears Tower from our house, but we were out there in the suburbs. So just that Midwest Illinois. For extreme seasons upbringing, which was interesting in that, like, because I didn't move to California until I went to work for Seymour Duncan. That was like 2007. So all of my guitar owning and building and repairing was done in a climate, where you had all 4 seasons. You had the extreme winters of Chicago and the lake effect and stuff like that, as well as like really hot and humid summers. So I got a crash course, in what makes a good guitar last all those seasons, or what makes, when a guitar will kind of fall apart, like if it didn't survive that weather, because I spent some time in a store doing repairs, and that's when people would bring you something, this was in the trunk of my car. Then I brought it into the club, and then, and then this happened. Can you fix it?
Right. Right.
So I kind of cut my teeth on that kind of stuff as well.
And coming up, learning, and you a lot of your stuff was self-taught, I'm assuming.
It really is. Yeah, we had StuMac, so you'd get some VHS tapes and like read the articles and things. But yeah, it was books and tapes. I never thought I was already making guitars by the time I was even out of high school. So it didn't really ever occur to me to do a Roberto Venn course or anything like that. Like I was, like I said, I was already knee deep into it by that point. And as much as I didn't do my homework when it came to history or biology, I did do my homework when it came to guitar stuff.
Right.
That was what I was really interested in, and so I have one of those kind of like, you know, ADHD brains that will then hyper focus on some stuff. So if I really
Yeah.
want to learn something, if I really want to find out about something, then it becomes insatiable, and I'll find out.
Yeah. Well, I was like, yeah, I started working on my own guitars as a necessity,
Yeah,
lack of money, and
right,
rewiring things with duct tape. Like this will hold the wires
right,
together. Like
right.
it's okay. I'm getting sound out of it, and I fell into this business by accident. So I remember the first StuMac catalog, or not catalog, the guitar maintenance handbook that
Yes,
StuMac has. Someone gave me that, and I was blown
yeah,
away. I was like, "Oh, there's special tools for all this,"
right,
and so I was lucky enough to be surrounded by a few techs early in my career that took their time with me because I was
yeah,
bringing all these primitive ways of I could fix this, like
yeah,
so I didn't learn how to solder until I was a real tech.
yeah, yeah. Then you get the real technique, right? Someone teaches you, how
Yeah,
it's supposed to look. Um, Yeah, you're talking about the tools. That's how I backed into a lot of this stuff too. You'd open up the StuMac catalog, and Dan Earlywine would say, "I just invented a new tool that does this." And as a 13-year-old, you're going, "Oh, that's how they do that." Whatever it was. How do you take frets out of a guitar? Well, you look at all of a sudden you're in the catalog, and it goes, "Here's a fret puller."
yeah,
Rather than using your fret cutters as fret pullers, try our smaller fret puller.
yeah,
To this day, I still use the big fret cutter as the puller personally, but I bought it, and just reading it tells you, okay, this is how they do it. It's not a butter knife under the fret, until you can pop it loose or whatever.
exactly.
you know, uh, I was always pretty good at extracting, so I never had a lot of chips. But then you read something like, now we have Teflon strips you can put in the fret slot in case you have to dam up, glue and sawdust to repair all the chip outs that you made. And just reading that, it lets you infer, like, all right, so chip outs, on ebony or whatever, they're an issue. That's something we need to think about. And then what do you do if you have chip out? Well, you have to fill it in. And so it just kind of informed us. And nowadays, there's everything that's available online. So there's nothing you can't learn.
Yeah,
Um, from other people. And then there's a lot of bad information too, just like anything else.
yeah.
Um, Somebody hammering in frets with a sledgehammer or something.
Somebody screwing an acoustic bridge into the body.
But yeah, it'll hold, drywall
Yeah.
screws. Got a nice coarse
If it
thread.
works and they're happy with it, more power
Yeah,
to them.
right, right. Yeah, I remember seeing the crisscross of tape on the edges, Washburn, I think it was, on the acoustic bridge. There was like two crisscrosses. I think it was, I want to say this, still haven't found, I'm looking for a video. Or something like that. I could be misquoting it, but it was, like I said, it was just two giant things of tape, and I was like, as a nerd, I was like, "What is he doing? Like, what is that? What were they fixing? What are they trying to solve?" It wasn't Eddie Van Halen putting tape on the guitar.
Yeah, yeah,
It was just some taped off bridge, and um, so if it works, like you say, then do it, right?
if it works, yeah.
Yeah.
For years I had a Les Paul, my first Les Paul that I had, and the pickup ring that someone had routed out the P90s of an old Les Paul Pro
Yeah.
and put in a humbucker, so the pickup rings didn't quite match up. So I would just tape it in there, and that was my superstition. You can't replace that tape. That's
Yeah.
where it's
Right.
leave the tape. And I
Right.
had so many
Load
guys going,
bearing.
"Hey, I can fix that for you." I'm like,
Right.
"No."
No. No. That's the sound.
Yeah. When did you start Falbo Guitars?
Well, I would build some guitars, early on, like right out of high school, even. And I was at a shop, and so there are some guitars out there that have that name, to say Falbo in the headstock from way back then. That would be like '94 or something, like the '90s. And I right out of school too. I also went to Westheimer Corporation, which was sort of the U.S. hub for the Cortec factory that was in
Yeah.
Korea. So we did some design work and stuff there, but I also ran like the Mighty Mike guitar parts division. because they would import all the parts, and that's what Mighty Mite was at that time. In the 70s, it was this guy Randy who started it and had a hodgepodge of like DiMarzio, Charvel type parts and things like that. But then in the 90s, it was readily available replacement parts for factory guitars, and so they all came from the Korg factory in Korea and other places that would have been more common. Where you have this bridge you see it on a dozen different guitar brand guitars. Where do I get it? And so that was that. So I was there for a couple of years, and then went on to do that. Make guitars, handle repairs. Got into some pretty complex repairs, the types of things like this guitar was literally in a flood, like an exploded Gretsch, things like that, where you're really getting into the full extent of repair, not just a fret guy or not just a pickups guy and a setup guy. But so I got pretty deep into it. And then for about 9 or 10 years, I handled like finance and investment. Like I got out, I had the real job, where you dressed up nice.
Yeah.
And I was out for a while. And that's when we started, my wife and I started having kids. And then after about however long that lasted, at some point in there, that's when I came up with the P-Rails pickup and was starting to talking to Seymour Duncan about licensing that to them. And their new products person left at that time, within that time window that I was speaking to them. And that's when I was like, well, maybe I'll go back in. And so I sent my resume to become their new products person, as well as then license them the P-Rails design and come up with whatever, the new products that we came up while I was over at Seymour Duncan.
Okay.
So from there, I was always making guitars. Like I never stopped building.
Yeah.
But from there, then when I left Seymour Duncan, I split into two things. One was bringing this, developing this technology with Fishman that became the Fishman Fluids pickups. That was a technology that I had been made aware of. They came and talked to me about it when I was at Seymour Duncan, but Seymour ended up passing on the tech, like they didn't do the license deal. And I knew something had to be done with it. It was just too cool. It was just too disruptive. Something had to be done. And so that's when I called Larry Fishman. I said, if I have something, are you in? You want to talk about it? He said, yes, come on. And so once I left Duncan, I went and talked to them about it. We arranged that and then went into development on those pickups and that whole pickup system, which has now become a huge, portion of the market. The market share that they have taken is immense.
It is, yeah.
It's fantastic. And then, but at the same time,
that pickup system kind of took off.
As soon
as it was released into the market.
Yeah, it only took maybe a year or two. Like what happens in pickups is a lot of times you come out with pickups and the OEM companies, wherever, Ibanez, ESP or whatever, they're usually a year or two behind because first of all, they already have stuff in development for the following year. And they're also waiting to see, are these guys, is this really going to be something? So a lot of times they don't jump on board. Well, our over-the-counter sales were so good that it was you couldn't deny it, and so those guys were a little bit, like I said, they were behind the curve, not because they're late thinkers or anything. Like I said, they're just busy, but it was within maybe 2 or 3 years that it became evident that this was here to stay, and it became something very big.
Yeah,
we got a lot of artists on board with a company like Fishman, who was not in the electric guitar space. And that was Larry Fishman's thing. He was like, why would I make electric pickups? It's not, everyone else is doing fine. Like, I don't need to make a Larry Fishman JB, a Larry Fishman PAF. What am I doing? He could have got some OEM business based on it. He could have made some money, but he's a man of integrity, and he never, it had to have been something. And so in this case, it really was something. It was something super cool and super unique. And so the over-the-counter sales were great. Then come the artist stuff, and then comes the OEM. But when you don't have any SKUs, when you're just launching stuff from the start, from scratch, it made the most sense to grab these artists and go, okay, I'm going to make this person's sound and that person's sound and this person's sound. So we have things like the classics and the moderns and the single coil Strat pickups. But then as you extended it out, it made sense to partner with artists and get them on board. Once those guys would play the pickups, they were hooked. Like everybody, whatever, whoever it was, Steph Carpenter,
I was going to say,
and
he was one of the first guys that,
he was the early adopter. Yeah.
yeah.
And so his tech was REM. It still is to some extent. He's in and around the business techs for a ton of people. So his tech, coming full circle with the kind of stuff we're talking about, his tech is, kind of suggests to him, and we're going back and forth, hey, man, you should really try these. And so it's really Ken, Susie at Fishman, myself, Rem, Steph's tech, and then Steph. It's us over at Mates trying these things in his guitar for the first time, pre-signature, right? But just the moderns. And he was playing. He couldn't stop for like 20 minutes. He's standing in front of the cabinet, and he's just like, man, these are insane. The feel, everything, right? There's a lot of benefits to Fluence technology. And as you sit and play them longer, they reveal themselves. Man, that tactile, the feel. I go for this harmonic, the speed, the clarity under gain. Like no matter how much gain, like the secret not secret, but the Fluence coil is the magic. There is it's very, very phase aligned and time aligned. It's very there's no slew rate behind it. So like in a normal pickup, trebles, mids, and basses have different rise times, or they're kind of hitting it at slightly different times. It's very difficult to measure, but where you hear it, just as a layperson, is you start to get muddy. You start to lose the individual notes, and a lot of people are like, well, so clarity, it's treble. Like, no, it's not brilliance, it's not treble, it's nothing like that. It's actually phase alignment in the time constant. If your highs, mids, and lows are perfectly time aligned before they go into this heavy distortion, then the harmonic multiples remain time aligned. If you have a little bit of slew or a little bit of phase smearing where you play a note, but the note you play is delivered by the pickup actually across, a bit of a time, gap. It's, again, we're talking, almost impossible to detect it. It's just that the result of that is that in your distortion characteristics, you now have like a more garbled sounding chord when you play that weird complex, chord that has dissonance in it.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of muddy through the game. And then the Fluence pickups don't. They're very time aligned, very fast. Yeah. So,
you said,
his tech, I was going to just button that up. So the tech hooked us up. Sometimes that's how we get involved with an artist, is through their tech, who goes, hey, I tried these things and they're great. And then Rem was also Steve Stevens' tech. Yeah. And so I would fill in for him sometimes when he would double book one or the other. And then that's how I kind of became involved in that. So now here I am. Anyways, go ahead.
Well, you said earlier that you designed the P-Rail.
Yeah.
So that, to me, when I saw the P-Rail, like that, the first thing I thought is like, this is probably the coolest thing that anyone has ever come up with. That was my personal thing. And I was trying to tell friends, like, this is the pickup you need to put. It's everything. Everything you want is right here.
Right. Right.
Dude, how do you just sit around, or is it out of necessity that you come up with this stuff?
Well, in product development, there's a bunch of ways to skin it. And for me, maybe I'm a little bit more on the let's say Steve Jobs, back to Henry Ford, these product development people that have a sense that people won't know what they want until you show it to them, right? Until you come up with it. And the other method of product development that you see a lot in our industry is, I'm going to poll the audience. I'm going to ask all of my artists or all of my customers, what do you want the most? Then I'm going to take that data in, I'm going to compile it, maybe put it in a spreadsheet and distill it down to the kind of thing that I think I need to launch. And in general, that gives you something that's maybe 3 to 5 years too late. Because by the time you finish your product development cycle, probably some other people have beat you to the market, or you're getting those suggestions because other companies have already done it. So now you're coming in with a Me Too product, right? I want a delay pedal that has tap tempo and dotted eighth notes. And, it's like, by the time the 20th company realized that they needed that, you better have something else that makes people want that delay pedal, because if that was your only thing, well, everybody has that already.
Yeah.
And so I'll write them. You can write it both ways. Like sometimes you say, well, we make this pickup in this format, but we have to make it in this other format so that people who have this kind of bass or this kind of a guitar can use it. Okay, that's obvious. And you're going to take that from market data. You're going to say, well, how many people do we think will actually buy this thing if we do spend the money and make it in another shape or another format? So then you're doing ROI calculations. And so that's when those other data points will drive product development. But then sometimes there's the thing that you think of that you, like, it's people, like I said, maybe don't know that they want until they see it. Like, for example, this is, I'm right now I'm at GNL, and I'm in their, I'm in Leo's laboratory. This is Leo Fender's office. Yeah, it's a nice quiet place to record a podcast. But if you could see the kind of stuff that I'm looking at, like I'm looking at all these, instruments and all these pickups and things like that he had left that he'd been working on. It's really surreal. It's outrageous. But at some point, so going back to basses, I had an idea for a fretted and a fretless bass combination. And what I do there is, first of all, the fretless portion is raised up to meet the height of the fret top.
Yeah.
So when you're playing, you have a seamless transition from fretless to fretted, as far as the height is concerned. But then I take the nut for the fretless strings, the two fretless. So take a 5-string, right? Bottom 3 strings are fretted. All your money notes. You can make all the money on the bottom, the low notes, they have frets. And then if you want to express yourself, you slide up into the fretless zone. So on the fretless side, I take the nut and I move it back about, the size of your finger or whatever, because when you're playing the fretted part, you're behind the fret. And so if you don't even think about it, if all you do is just play the fretted notes and move up to the fretless part, you're in tune, because that's where the fret line would have been. It would have been pulled back. And that's the kind of thing that you can't ask. You can ask an audience and have them maybe say, I wish I had a bass that gave me fretless and fretted sounds.
Yeah.
But you don't really arrive here from that request. The other thing is that request is very small. The market share on something like that is very minute. But if you make a bass, and we'll find out in the next year or two, but if you make a bass commercially available that allows all of your fretted players to not have to worry about, to just go ahead and play all the notes on the fretted, now you have like the sort of gateway drug, if you will.
Yeah.
It's now become something that you don't have to be somebody who plays fretless all the time or toggles back and forth between them all the time. You just have to be somebody who plays fretted bass constantly. That's your instrument, but you wish to experiment with some fretless stuff.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. That's the kind of thing you really never know. P-Rails was the same way. There were some people at Seymour Duncan, rightfully so, not that were like, this is weird. I don't know if people are going to be into this. It's because, again, if you didn't know it till you saw it, right? You never heard of it till you looked at it. And so there were some people within Duncan who were like, maybe we should release this through the custom shop, a real, soft release, and just see if there's interest in the next year or two. And then if there is, we release it to production. And I said, that's the fastest way to kill it, because you'll have just told the world that it's this quirky, weird, or nerdy thing, pickup geek, right? You've just told everybody that it's an oddball item. You have to release it as a full production unit and go, here it is, check it out, production, whatever the retail, 100 something.
We dig it, you'll dig it.
Right. And then people go, oh, wow, especially with the brand like Seymour Duncan, they go, okay, this must be cool. Because there's a lot of weird, oddball, nerdy stuff that floats around the Seymour Duncan custom shop that only stays there. And again, rightfully so. Or sometimes you'll have a breakout, like we're going to take the Gretsch pickup and give it to you in a humbucker-sized format. And they did that for a while, and certain people, but then the sort of Gretsch pickups kind of rose a little bit in popularity. There's some more TV Jones stuff gaining popularity. So then that's something that kind of did have a growth time, But it was, I mean, they probably spent a decade making a Gretsch pickup in a humbucker format before it really got any traction. So P-Rails, again, I think would have been the same thing. It would have achieved the commercial success that it did, unless it had been launched as a full production product with like a full launch and full release. And so what happened at Duncan was, without disclosing numbers, we had forecasting, that was X, and it was not a lot. It would have been something like where a Fat Cat and a Stag Mag live, kind of in that lower tier. And so what happened is the first year that we released P-Rails, it was about 5x that. It was about 5 times that. The numbers were more like one of their most, more popular pickups, not a JB or a 59, but way, way, way up there. And it stayed there for a long time, in the thousands. So yeah, sometimes I come up with, the stuff just out of thin air. You usually have to be cognizant of what the market is going to think of it. Just like Steve Jobs didn't care that you lost your button keyboard on the BlackBerry. So he cared about how people would have received the no keyboard on the iPhone. But went ahead and did it, didn't need to really pull the audience on it, because if you have something, that people will eventually want once they see it, then you go forward. My acoustic guitars are kind of like that. That was an invention. There's a patent on the bridge design.
Where that was my next question.
Okay. Yeah. So that's where I managed Torque, and that was another one. So Duncan, they were very kind to me when I first joined. Everything that I had invented prior in Chicago belonged to me, and then anything I invented while I was at Seymour Duncan, of course, belongs to them, and that's how it should be. You go to work for the company. If I came up with the next great thing, they own that design. They would have the right to patent it. And so the bridge design I had prior to going to Seymour Duncan, but they wrote it into a technology agreement. But also, if I had wanted to do anything with it, it would have kind of had to have been when I left Seymour Duncan. They could have done something like, hey, we're going to license that bridge design along with a piezo pickup and a preamp to Guild or to somebody, where they could have launched it within the company if they'd focused on acoustic, pickup combination. Because the bridge design does even make a piezo work better, because I have all that up and down excursion rather than the torque.
Yeah.
So it has some, you could tie those things together if you really wanted to. But if I had wanted to release that product, again, it's when I leave Duncan. So I do the Fishman Influence thing, and I do the official sort of Falbo Guitars company launch, around the same time.
Yeah. There's a saying that the first one through the door always gets bloody. Do you run into that a lot when you present something?
I do. I would tear up if I let myself think about it too much right now. So thanks, Barbara Walters or whoever, but it's totally true. And I'll probably won't be someone who gets rich off of some of this stuff either. And that's there's part of that, part of that comes into play as well. It could turn out that my acoustic bridge design eventually gets adopted, however many years later by more people. I don't know. Right now, I'll license it to companies. I've talked to a few different companies about, implementing it into their stuff. But again, it's kind of weird. So unless they just jumped in both feet, it's just now still just this cool thing I do on not too many guitars. They're custom. They're kind of expensive, and it's just for us. But the phase alignment and the way, it's better with pickups. It's better with mics. It's the highs and lows are extended. There's all the marketing terms that can be used on it. They happen to be true.
Yeah.
And we'll see. But I want to say, the guy who invented the X brace, in a Martin, I think it was again 20 years later. It was years later before that really rose, to popularity. And so on the acoustic world, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of, you're maybe not, maybe you don't see it in your lifetime. So I don't know. We'll see. But
when I was doing some research on the Intention bridge system, I immediately thought of this this book I read several years ago. It's called 7 Days at the Links, and
Okay.
it's about golf. But the one of the main characters designs a new putter, and
Okay.
he's trying to get this cat to use it. He finally uses it, but he's ridiculed so much because no one's ready to have the
Really?
putter redesigned, and it's pretty cool. It's like
Yeah.
I immediately when I was watching a video on it,
Uh-huh.
I immediately thought of that. I was like, man, we're not ready for this. This is so
Right.
cool, but we're
Yeah. And there's a lot of disruption. I'm into disruption, and but at the same time, again, as I'm talking to you in Leo's laboratory, even at Duncan, whether it was P rails or whatever, with Fishman, I always have my hooks just deeply embedded in the past and in history, because at Fishman, for example, we could have made pickups that sounded new, that had some kind of different sound that you hadn't heard before. And we never would have been that successful. But the respect that we have to have for why we like something, whether it's the vintage P bass, a Strat, a Tele, classic PAFs, a Duncan JB from the 1970s, that maybe sounds a little bit cooler than one that you buy today, right off the shelf, just because it's been aged, and a Butyrate bobbin, whatever, all the mojo that's in it, right? Rough cast magnets and things like that. So you find these snowflakes that are like the most perfect example of something vintage, and you say, well, how can I capture that and then recreate it perfectly every time, so that now, if you want the sound of some cool old, PAF in the neck position, and you have the Fishman Classic, in voice one, any one of 10,000 Fishman Classics will sound exactly the same because of how it's manufactured, because of the technology. And so it gets you the ideal version of that sound, but they're all the same. And there's something really to be said about that, because we are in a business of snowflakes. And so not all of us can spend time traveling the country looking at pawn shops trying to find the perfect whatever year you think, Les Paul or any other, SG or something. And you get the one with the perfect neck, but the pickups don't sound good. So I'm into disruptive tech, but also with a keen eye in the past and in history. And so you got something like the whether it's Fishman or the bridge on my acoustic guitar. Like, my acoustic guitars do have an X brace. I could do a ladder brace because I don't have torque, and I've done it on a like a Weisenborn type lap steel. But the X brace also brings the sound into the top of the guitar in a way that we're familiar with, right? So I didn't make an acoustic guitar that sounded weird. I made an acoustic guitar that sounded like all the stuff you would do to your best Martin in the studio. You're going to tighten the bass, you're going to EQ this, you're going to whatever, you're going to make sure your mic placement's perfect. And so I kind of give you that, but just coming off the guitar. So yeah, our industry is weird when it comes to disruptive tech, because you could say like the Parker Fly should have revolutionized everything. And it kind of did. There's things that people took from it. So nowadays you can still find people taking a guitar neck and wrapping it in carbon fiber across the back. You find, mass use of stainless steel frets. Ken Parker was one of the first people to kind of push that out into the industry. There was a piezo in the bridge that Larry Fishman did. People have piezos in their electric guitars. But all of it at once in the Parker Fly was kind of just a bit too much all at once for the market. And so while they were still very, very successful for having something that was unique, it didn't supplant, or it didn't take the place of.
Yeah.
People still wish they could get their hands on 50s Strats and Gibsons and Tellys. I'm going to, tonight actually, I have to go tech for a guy named Jason Sene, who he would play with like people like Dirty Knobs for a long time, Mike Campbell's band. But he's a solo guy. He's got some albums out himself. And he just happens to have the means to have some expensive old guitars. And so there's a 59 Les Paul. He's got old 50 Strats. He has all of the real stuff.
Yeah.
And you put your hands on those things, and there is a lot of magic to them. Same thing here at G&L. They're still, they have CNC machines involved in the manufacturing of the guitars because you can't have enough people running the pin routers at any given time. You need the productivity in today's day and age from a CNC, but the CNC isn't behaving any different than a person with a pin router. It's just following those same types of tool paths. And then comes all the love and care that you get from a person hand sanding and doing the fret work and dressing the fret ends and things like that. And so there's something that happens when you put all that love into something that is also rooted in how, like, there's an understanding of how things were done back in the 50s. That is why they produced some of our favorite instruments. Some were dogs, some were not good. But if you don't have that kind of an understanding, then you end up designing things that are deaf to the past. And then you don't really maybe know why, but maybe they just don't quite grab, mass appeal.
Yeah, exactly. Let me ask you, I met you, like I said, I had no clue you had done any of this. I met you as a tech. You were teching for Steve Stevens. How long have you been teching for Steve, and how did you make that transition?
Well, so since I have all this, experience in the field, right? Designing pickups and pedals and making guitars, those are all the kind of the prerequisites to get into this field. And if you're skilled in those areas, then you can usually migrate over to this field. But I wasn't looking for it. So Rem, his tech, as I said, he would ask me to fill in sometimes when he would be double booked. So I'd fill in for Steve, I'd fill in for Deftones, for Steph Carpenter, and sometimes some of these other super groups that that they put together with, like Billy Morrison has one. Royal Machines is his band, and he has it's just a collection of all kinds of his friends and family, people that are just awesome musicians and singers and whatever. Like last time David Lee Roth sang 3 songs with them. It's amazing. And then like another one is Kings of Chaos. That's Matt Sorum on drums. The last one from that was Sammy Hagar was there, so amongst all these other people. But so I would do the fill in, and this is where it gets into like some techie talk, right? He would ask me to fill in because he knew that I would just take care of business, and sometimes in our business, people are trying to steal your job.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to, you put a filler person in there, and they're like, well, this guy didn't do this right or whatever. Or I'm, maybe you should hire me. And you get a little bit of that. Our industry, maybe you have a similar opinion, is filled mostly with really cool people. And then sometimes you have that little, some of that, I don't know, Mean Girls, like high school stuff, like don't go with that person. You go with this person instead, or people get on a team and then they want to bring their friends on, because they want that bus hang. They want to hang out with those guys on the tour bus. And so they want to kind of play a little bit of musical chairs and get other people in there. But I would just go in, take care of it. See you guys later. I'm going to go back to making pickups and guitars. And Rem and I, we're great friends. And it's so it's through that then we were coming back. Now we're coming out of COVID. And he was, again, just getting booked. And, you're coming out of COVID. It's like, who's vaccinated, who's not? Are they going to let these people in? You can't even get into Canada. Now, it's got all kind of weird. And I actually hadn't been vaccinated in that moment. Wasn't necessarily anti. We were all kind of sitting around going, what's going to happen? Is anybody going to grow a third, eyeball? And so where I lived, we didn't really have it. It wasn't. Our case rate was real low. I was in reasonably good shape. If I had gotten it, it wouldn't have, statistically speaking, I probably would have had a really hard time, and then I would have come out of it. So I wasn't in a hurry to get it, but they were like, well, if you, will you do it? I said, sure. So I got the Johnson & Johnson, and, it was, and then I went to work. So the reason I say all that is it wasn't like, being somebody who would go in there and not trying to take someone's position. Then I ended up still taking his position with Steve Stevens. But again, we were friends. We love each other. He stayed. He was doing Steph Carpenter then, and then Deftones. Like sometimes Steph now he does go on tour. So I think he's with Shinedown now. So Rem is, he's doing great. But that's when I ended up being full time, for Steve, being his main guy.
Yeah.
Is mostly in a post COVID world. And they don't tour that much, so it gives me time to still be doing my R&D with Fishman, do the R&D work here at GNL, to come up with some new models and just work even on their CAD programming and stuff. Maybe make a tool path more efficient or something like that.
Yeah.
So it gave me that time to do that, but Idle does tour, a fair amount. It's not like he's, it's not like just some Vegas residency once a year, but it's not this constant. He's not going year round. We'll go out for 2 to 4 weeks, maybe a month, maybe just a little extra than a month, and then we're back for a while. And then even when we're out there, he'll be more like one show day, 1 day off, a show day, 2 days off. So it's pretty sparse when you're out there, which gives me time to do CAD work on the computer, to deal with Fishman, to sometimes even there'll be a 2-day break and I'll zip off, exiting the tour, go to Boston, to where Fishman is, or go to where an artist is and do a little of that R&D, and then join back up with them by the time we hit the next town, the next show.
Yeah.
So it's worked out great. If I feel very fortunate to have jumped into this field at the level that I did.
Yeah.
Because if you go up from there, then it's a greater commitment. Now, it might be nice to have a retainer. It might be nice to know that you're going to be busy, all year round. People like the people who worked with Kiss, for example, or U2 or whoever, you might have this sort of, I'm always working, which is nice. It can be nice for the family, but wouldn't allow me to kind of be more diverse and get my, explore all kinds of other interests, if I was out there constantly.
Well, it seems like if you did that, if you were just like a full-time tech, that brain of yours would not allow it.
Yeah, I would probably go a little bit stir crazy. But also, I've been married. My wife and I have been together since the 90s, right? Since the last year of high school. And so married 28 years, something like that. And so I have a stable family unit. And so when I started to do this, I think our youngest was maybe 10, 9 or 10 years old. And so that was then at a time where we could withstand that. We could withstand that I would be gone for 4 weeks at a time or more in order to be a provider, and help take care of the family. It's that's not a life. The 11 months out of the year is not something that I personally could do, given my family situation, and continue to feel like I was being the best, husband and father. There are other people who do that.
Yeah.
And their situation is fine. They do okay with it. For me, it wouldn't have been this wouldn't have been a field that I would have entered when our two youngest were ages 2 and 3, or 1 and 2, or something, that might not have worked. But so this came along at just the right time.
Right on, man.
In our life too. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a fan question for myself.
Hey.
Growing up listening to Steve and just having him be in my top 5, the first thing I would have wanted to know is how he did the effect in Rebel Yell.
Well, so the intro or the solo?
The solo, the machine gun.
The solo thing, I think they had. He has told it. And so, like, I don't think it wasn't an eventide, I don't think, but it's a unit where they're maxing out like the pitch fluctuation.
Oh, okay.
So like imagine a pitch shifter on a waveform where it's just blasting you sharp and flat, I don't know if that's doing it in a sine wave or a square wave or a triangle.
Yeah.
But whatever that is, I believe that was maxing out the modulation. Now we do that with a ray gun,
Yeah,
literal ray
I've
gun.
seen him.
Yeah,
It's a
and he
toy
just
ray
did.
gun, right?
It is, and he modifies them. That's another thing that I love about Steve. He's into this gear. He's into the tech side of it. He programs all of his own stuff. So, I mean, maybe I get in there and organize a set list in something or whatever, like just silly things. But I don't have to set a delay time. He knows what
Yeah.
tempo the song's in. He's the guy that programs the delay, tempo, and does all of that stuff. So it's really great because we can geek out on it and stuff. Maybe sometimes he'll talk to me about it, and say, well, how come I can't, I'll be like, well, it's not panning all the way because there's a blend, you have it panned left and right, but the stereo spread isn't at 100%. And so, that's why it's not fully panned or something. Maybe I'll figure out some little detail. But for the most part, he's totally self-sufficient. So I love that. The ray gun, he modifies them. He pulls them apart, figures out where to, tap in with like a potentiometer so that he's rotating, so he speeds up, slows down, just little circuit bending things. So he used the ray gun. Then they just did Pound Cake with Sammy Hagar, and he found a kid's like a bubble gun, like this big bulbous tip thing where you have the thing. Same exact like motor noise as the drill. So he took that and he's putting that on the guitar for the intro. And he's, like I said, very tech minded. That was an effects device, you know what I mean, like a modulation up and down, to the best of my knowledge. But there is some place where he says it. He says exactly what piece of gear it was. I don't remember.
I think I read about it years ago in a Guitar World, and then I've seen Billy several times. We were on the same stage when you and I met, and I was just waiting for him to pull the ray gun out. And it's such a cool gag. So
it's awesome. Yeah, it's super fun. It makes sense because it was in the song, just like the Pound Cake thing, right? It was in the song. That's it's not. It would only be gimmicky if it wasn't true to form, right? So I think it's people love it. It's always an applause line. It's super cool. It's super fun, and
and I love how he's made it his thing. Like his guitar picks.
It's on the headstock. It's on the headstock. It's very identifiable, but a lot of people ask about that intro to Rebel Yell, which is he'll play that simultaneously. The bass line and the.
Oh man, I've seen him play it on acoustic.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, he's amazing with his flamenco stuff, and just, he has full control, full dexterity. So he's doing a lot, with both hands. And so when it comes to something like that, just night after night, it's just so great to hear him. Another thing I say is like, he's easy on the ears, in my in-ears every night, I could listen to that guy.
Yeah.
And there's probably people that I could tech for where I would just be like, oh man, like the 90th time, like the first time is great. The 900th time, I got to hear the same, lick.
I get it.
It's in people's DNA, just the vibrato, just the notes choices and things.
Yeah.
His tone, his finger tone.
He's probably, I'm not going to say he's an underrated guitar player because people know they give him his props.
Yeah,
he's so well-rounded. He's such a well-rounded guitar player.
Yeah, and you find that when you go into these super groups, because he'll have to play anything from, like they were doing Cheap Trick song with Robin Zander. I watched him do all these things, and while he's not necessarily, nor should he, going after cloning, right? He's not trying to, I mean, he's Steve. He should play some things his way, right?
Yeah.
It's always in the vibe. It's always like he always learns the parts and he always plays them in a Steve way, which is very, like I said, very easy to listen to, very pleasing, very easy on the ears.
He reminds me,
he'll
not the styles. He reminds me a lot of Andy Timmons.
Yeah,
Andy
will do that. Yeah, yep. And I'm, I'm a huge fan. I'm huge King's X fan, right? So Doug Pinnick and Ty Tabor.
Yeah.
Steve was into prog back in the early days. So like he's coming off of Yes and all these guys. Like so Steve may write pop songs, but with hooks, with really good hooks. But there's a lot of stuff behind it, like his chord inversions, just the notes that he's choosing. They're very, very informed by music that stretches outside of the box.
Yeah.
And that's where that's why a lot of his stuff never starts to sound old,
Yeah.
Like, it's always fresh. It's always kind of exciting because it wasn't just like he wasn't just like a blues rock player that has really just found all the edge corners of his little box, in the pentatonic scale. He's not like that at all. And the flamenco stuff finds its way in, everything sort of works its way in in the aggregate, to his overall style and what you get night after night on a full, Billy Idol set.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guitar work and a lot of variety, a lot of different guitar work.
Well, like I said, he's always been one of my favorite guys. When he left the band for a while, and Billy got the cat from Austin back in the '90s.
Yeah,
but it was not a happy time in my life.
Right,
Steve left Billy.
Yeah, but you got the Vince Neil record, right?
I got the Vince Neil record. Yeah,
we got that out of it, out of the deal. But yeah, everyone was in. I mean, dude, it was those were crazy times for rock guitar players, right?
Yeah,
you had the grunge coming in, and so all that stuff had to kind of, everyone had to figure out what they were going to do between 1990 and 1997, or 8. Everyone was kind of figuring out, where they belonged or what they should do. I think, if you had a career in the 80s, then that was a transition time, Some people were like, "Oh, I'm rootsy now. I went back to acoustic guitar. I write, And
a lot of those cats just went to Nashville, started playing in Nashville bands.
Exactly. Yeah.
Red Beach did it.
Totally. Oh, and Kip Winger, like writing songs, like hit songs for people. A lot of Dan Huff, whatever. Like all these guys had a lot of them. If they had value, they really did have continued careers.
Yeah. And more power to them. They made it work for themselves. So
That's right.
Well, Frank, thank you so much, man. I learned so much in this conversation, dude. I love, as they say, nerding out on guitar.
Yeah.
I hope we cross paths again because I'm going to pick your brain.
Oh, absolutely. I'm here whenever you want. It's there's always road stories, as you know. Like we were stuck in Canada. We were in we were on a plane for 5 hours. David Lee Roth was on the plane in the front, in first class. We all ended up having to get off the plane after 5 hours, and we're sitting with David Lee Roth in baggage claim for 4 hours waiting for our stuff to arrive so that we could all go back to a hotel. And he's just, being the nicest guy. He was just unassuming. No one really recognized him because they weren't expecting to see David Lee Roth in a Canadian airport. But yeah, man, it's never a dull moment out there.
Yeah, he wasn't holding court.
He was awesome. He was great. There's some people, and like I said, within 2 weeks, I watched Steve Stevens play Van Halen songs with David Lee Roth and then with Sammy. But these guys by now, I mean, you might have a story or two of them, back in the day, being, being perceived as unkind to somebody.
Yeah.
But in this time, these guys, a lot of them have gotten, they've aged and they're generally nice guys, as you know, a lot of these people who are celebrities, they're generally nice people. And when we see them, if you hear a story, there's usually two sides to it,
Yeah.
This guy, this person yelled, it's like, well, yeah, but this is something that was going on for 3 weeks. They've been telling the monitor guy, about these issues. And then,
it was caught on camera that night.
Right. It was caught on camera. The feedback's coming up through the wedge that should have been off during that part of the song anyways. And we've told the guy a million times, and you get a dirty look, and then the dirty look is in the photograph, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this guy treats the monitor person bad. There's always other stories,
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, man.
Well,
I'm
man,
around.
thank you so much for taking time. Our podcast, it's called Is Breakfast Included? And if we were having breakfast, what would you have?
There's a place in Wheaton, Illinois, Seven Dwarfs, and they make they make cheese blintzes that are out of this world. So if you've never had a blintz, you know what the cheese blintzes are?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like the cottage cheese, wrapped up in a crepe, and it's nice and greasy. It's a Midwest, restaurant. So yeah, I mean, I'm an eggs Benedict guy and all kinds of breakfast stuff. But that when I go back and visit Illinois, like, I don't care, I'll go there every day, for 3 days in a row, and it's just pile of whipped cream and blueberry, sauce on top.
And what's the place called again?
Seven Dwarfs.
Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah, Seven Dwarfs in Wheaton, Illinois. And it's one of those things, like, so many people get it wrong. Like they'll make a little burrito out of it, and it's got a bunch of lemon in it or whatever. Like, no, I'm out. It's got to be the greasy thin pancake thrown over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's when they're scraping it off the grill. There's like burnt
pieces,
batter. Yeah. It's all just, it's just.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, man.
Yeah. So that's a big one for me.
Oh, buddy, it was good talking to you, man.
Likewise.
And let's catch up soon.
Yeah, maybe I'll see you out there.
All right, brother.
All right, take care.
All right. Right on, Frank Falbo. What did I tell you, man? Interesting guy. Like, he just kind of blew my mind with everything he's done. And I didn't know about any of this. Like, I thought I did my research and I didn't do it enough, but this guy just blew my mind. You can find out more about Frank and Falbo Guitars at falboguitars.com. Check out this intention bridge system. It's amazing. Like I told him, we ain't ready for that. Also, if Billy Idol and Steve Stevens are coming to a town near you, go check it out. Maybe Frank will give you a guitar pick or a set list if you scream out, "Hey, you," enough. All right, guys, while you're online, check out isbreakfast.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram from there. Check out our YouTube page. Make sure you're a subscriber if you haven't already subscribed. Rate and review our show on applepodcast.com. I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.